So I want to welcome you again here to Youngstown for our forum Understanding the Socioeconomic Divide, the Coast, and the Rust Belt, brought to you by this YSU Center for Working Class Studies in partnership with Columbia Business School. A little bit about the YSU Center for Working Class Studies. Started in 1996, and the center was the first academic program in the U.S. to focus on issues of working class. The department's mission is to increase awareness of and respect for working class life and culture through education, the arts, media, and research. Center for Working Class Studies is housed in YSU's College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences and closely affiliated with the American Study program, which Dr. Dolores Sisco, here, our panelist tonight, is the director of. The center offers courses in American Studies, English History, and Labor Studies, including a four-year graduate certificate, or a four-course graduate certificate in a focus area within American Studies. And on this table back here tonight, you'll see this advertisement. This is for a class that we're teaching in spring on community engagement in Youngstown specifically. I'm teaching this class along with another affiliate in the community. So for those that are local here, that are interested in this particular course, this is a new course and it'll be offered in the spring. So there's more information on the back table as well as information about the certificate offered through the university. And a little bit about this venue, the venue that you're in here. So opening in 1990, the Youngstown Historical Center for Industry and Labor preserves the history of the steel industry that dominated the Youngstown area's economic life for most of the 20th century. It's owned by the Ohio Historical Society and operated by Youngstown State University's Applied History Department. The facility, which was designated by noted architect Michael Graves, which was a member of the New York Five, for you young people, Google that, is reminiscent of a steel mill, complete with stylized smokestacks. So maybe you wouldn't notice that when you walked in. The style of the building is supposed to replicate that of a local steel mill. And I have a trivia question for you here before. And those that get this trivia question right are going to win. If you're local, yeah, so here's your option. If you're from New York, you're going to get a Penguin City beer glass, a lot of the prices. If you're local, we got 2 passes to the Labor Museum. So here's the question. What connection does this venue have to Columbia University? Does anybody know? Ooh, yeah. There we go.
The name of the senator is the name of his room.
Yes.
The senator's a grad of Columbia.
Wow. Okay, very good. Very good. We'll save this for the next one. That's amazing. Yes, so Senator Harry Michelle was depicted on that back wall. There was a little bit of giveaway back there. But he's a state senator who helped facilitate the construction of this particular museum. And he was a 1950 graduate, master's degree in urban economics. So he's actually a graduate of the business school as well. So pretty cool connection. A little bit about the format tonight. It's going to be fairly straightforward. We're going to have a number of prepared questions that we're going to ask the panelists, and then we're going to turn it right over to Q&A, and we're going to have a conversation about anything we want to have a conversation about. But before we do that, let me introduce you to the panel and your moderator. The panel is as follows, in no particular order. Dr. Glenn Hubbard, the Dean of Columbia Business School and a noted economist. Sarah Lown, Public Finance Manager, Northeast Ohio Development and Finance Authority. Dr. Dolores Sisco, Assistant Professor at Youngstown State University and Chair of the American Studies Program. And Matthew Stewart, journalist at The Atlantic and the author of the article Birth of the New American Aristocracy. What am I getting wrong? Aristocracy. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And our moderator tonight is Dr. Tim Francisco, Professor of English and the Director of the Center for Working Class Studies. And now I turn it over to Dr. Tim Francisco. So how about I hand
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out, and thanks to the panel for agreeing to be here. So good evening and welcome to Bridging the Divide Season 2 2.0, Redux, the sequel, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of our anniversary, so I want to start by looking back at last year's panel. During that talk, Professor Horton said one of the reasons Columbia came here was because post-election, quote, we had no idea what was going on in America. So my first question is to Glenn, and I wonder if you could talk about what's changed since then in the ways that you, your team, Columbia is approaching business education, your own research. What's happened since your first visit?
First, thanks for having us here. I do think that what Ray Horton, my colleague, was trying to express is that for a lot of people in the country, what happened in the election was a mystery. For many more, however, it was not. And for some time, we have had an emphasis both on the right and the left on a set of policies that might achieve certain objectives, but without any notion of what they do to Americans broadly. So we haven't had a systematic, what I would call, policy of opportunity and inclusion in the country. I happen to be a conservative, I could say it that way, but if I were liberal, I could say it that way too. But that's not the discussion we're having. So I think one of the things we try to do at the school is, since we're training future business leaders, give them a chance to really talk about that subject. They are going to be leading, they're going to be using their role to hopefully improve that. I think waiting for the political class to figure it out, we'd be waiting.
Thank you. So again, revisiting the premise of last year's discussion, I'd like to pose a question to the entire panel. You're representing the public sector, education, economics, media, a little bit of philosophy. What's changed in terms of the American divide since last year? Are we more divided? Are we less divided? And what has widened or closed the gap? We'll start with Matthew, please.
Well, I'd like to start with an optimistic note, if I may. And it's not that we're less divided. I think we arguably are more divided. But my optimism stems from the fact that we're talking about it a little bit more. And so let me thank you for inviting us here, and I want to thank the Columbia Business School for having invited me and the others here, because I think it's emblematic of something that is happening now. The other change that I want to draw attention to is, and this is more mixed, as we're talking about these things and as fundamental questions come up, I think there is a degree of radicalization going on. I think that the conversations on both sides are exploring areas which we have to explore, but that need to be handled carefully. I mean, this is, in the past 2 years, I've heard capitalism as a concept questioned more seriously than I have in previous times. And I think there's something good in that, but there's also something problematic.
Dolores.
I agree. I think the divide has gotten larger. People are just shouting at each other. And there are some common things that we can agree on, but people right now are just so angry. One common ground I can think of right now is healthcare. All of a sudden, after years of get rid of Obamacare, repeal Obamacare, and then people got used to it. Oh, I have a pre-existing condition. But we don't see people getting together over that. It's distraction after distraction. And so these gulfs just... Am I supposed to?
That's maybe David.
That's your Oscar music, right?
I do come from a family of entertainers, but too much.
Okay, I'm sorry, Dolores, please.
Oh, okay. Like I said, one of the common things that we can, try to talk about calmly is health care. There's so much scare and fear out there because, like I said, we went through years of Obamacare, socialism, blah, 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 and now people are discovering, I need health care. So, health care is one common thing that we all have to share. We can discuss how to keep that. Health insurance, we can discuss to keep that. We don't have to be on, the rigid sides of, we got to have universal health care. No, that's socialized medicine. There's got to be something in between we can talk about. and solve the problem. So that's one. Is it getting worse? I don't know. Maybe after Tuesday, I can give, a better assessment whether or not the political divide has gotten worse. The other thing is income inequality. Okay? Everyone keeps hearing, unemployment is down. That's all you ever hear. Unemployment is down. Everyone's working. But people who have to go to food banks have increased. Okay? So what does that tell us about these great jobs? They don't pay enough for people to live. Food banks are overwhelmed right now. And why is that if they're jobs for everyone? Okay? That's something we can talk about. Giving people a living wage. Even Trump supporters, I would bet, would sign on to that, to give people a living wage. But we have to get out of these old ways. If we have a minimum wage, if we have a living wage, that takes something from me. So we have to get out of that kind of thinking. And like I said, I might be optimistic, but I'll wait until Tuesday or Wednesday morning.
You're reserving your
Yes,
optimism.
I'm reserving.
Sarah, second question.
Yeah, I guess I have to say yes and no. That is, I listen to all of the noise on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News because I enjoy the sport of it. But I don't know that it reflects what's going on the ground, because when I'm at work, I'm with a lot of heavy Trump supporters, and I'm with a lot of heavy Trump non-supporters, and I think what I'm seeing post-election is more candid conversations about what that means. And you hear Trump supporters saying, well, I support Trump because my husband works in the oil and gas industry and I know he's gonna not shut us off. So there's those simple kinds of reasons, and then you realize, oh, okay, I get it. It's not like this whole worldview that's really threatening and race-based and this and that, but a lot of times it's a lot of sort of practical considerations. And I feel like those direct conversations really do lead to more compassion and understanding. And I think that they're tremendously important. And at the same time and simultaneous with that, I'm seeing a lot of my friends get off of Facebook, stop reading Twitter, only look at that other little Instagram thing, which has got a lot of pretty pictures on it. And I really think that's probably great, because at least my generation, we believe that Facebook stuff is real, and you forget that you're really just branding yourself on this little Facebook, and it's not all that real. And so you don't need to have serious conversations on Facebook. It's really a bad idea. And so I'm glad to see that technology's coming of age, and we're beginning to turn around and talk to each other directly, a little more deliberately. Not everyone, of course, we know, but I'm beginning to see a lot more people talk in those terms, and that heartens me quite a lot. I also want to agree with everything you said, Dolores, which was all great. I do see everyone on the right and the left agreeing that health care is a serious need, and that we have to stop pretending that it's the socialist threat, on our shores. And I feel heartened, because it's been a long time since sweeping legislation for the benefit of citizens has been entertained. But I think that if anything does, this might be the one. Keep my fingers crossed, but it might be the one.
Thank you. Glenn.
Well, I'm optimistic too. Maybe it's because I don't even know how to use Facebook. But I will say this, I agree with what everybody has said about optimism coming from having a conversation. If you look at our country's political history, we have seen periods of name-calling, even of people that we look at today as national heroes and treasures in their own time. There was much more name-calling. I'm not so worried about that, but I am worried about the divide. And I'm worried for the following reason. There are two economic forces that are dislocating not just this country but the world, and they are in the order of their importance, technological change, which generally we think of as a nice thing, we'd like to have more of it, and globalization. And while both of those have powerful forces to improve lives for everyone on average, they also create massive winner and loser problems. And we don't have enough political discussion of that. We talk about the gains, but not the losses. And here's the problem and how it affects the conversation. When you don't have an honest conversation about winners and losers, up the middle can come populism. And that's what we're seeing. So somebody says, look, I can fix it. In fact, maybe the person even says, I alone can fix it. And that is the problem in the national discussion. There is another way to have conversation with people, and that's talking about how to take the benefits of things like technological change and globalization and give everyone opportunity. And for that, you need government. So I think we need this conversation. And where I began, I think the fact that we're starting to talk like this, even with some name calling attached, may not be such a bad one.
So, Glenn, if I could follow up, obviously part of the conversation last year was the different effects of globalization on the coast versus the Midwest. And if I could, feed you some of your own words.
They sound so good.
They're really good. They're delicious. In a recent interview with the Wall Street Journal, you repeatedly use the word dignity. And you say that the goal of economics isn't GDP, it's to deliver a kind of mass prosperity with people feeling like they're all part of the system. You suggest, and let me know if I have this wrong, that we think about wage subsidies or supports, direct support for training, and personal reemployment accounts. The latter of which you helped to engineer in 2003 and again revived in 2012. Given our time constraints, could you choose one of those and give us an explanation of how that might benefit places like Youngstown?
Sure. My philosophy as an economist goes back to the Scottish Enlightenment, Adam Smith and others, whose view was simple, that prosperity is about mass flourishing. It's not about a few people flourishing, it's about everybody. Work has a strong element of dignity to it. I just don't think you can have mass flourishing without everybody having the opportunity to realize their potential in work. For some people, that's going to be a very high-skilled job. For others, it's not. What we owe everybody is not a particular outcome or a particular kind of job, but how to do it. So I would focus, as you said, one thing on the work subsidies. We in this country have a program called the Earned Income Tax Credit that's supposed to be a work support program. It's kind of sort of. It's mainly a family support program. Laudable as that may be. But if we're really concerned about work, we need a massive expansion of that program focused more on childless young people who need to be attached to the labor force. So I think we need to think an overarching way about work, not because of GDP, but because of the dignity it brings each and every person in this room.
Sarah, I wonder if, I see you nodding your head and taking some notes, and I wonder if you could respond to that. And also, if you could add to that a general picture, a general sense. What are our biggest economic challenges here in our area, and what are some of the wins that you're seeing?
Okay, that's a lot.
I know.
We have been expanding efforts in just securing earned income tax credits for individuals in this community. It is darn hard getting to people, and a lot of my daily life involves filling out government forms, and I've had a lot of education, and I still don't fill them out right, and so I find it very hard to get behind programs that are for a very narrow group, and that you also need, I think there's a lot of faculty who fill out those forms,
Yeah.
trained into it, so that we can get folks in there. And I find that frustrating. And here in Youngstown, we've had to go through this whole kind of growing up process when it came to economic development, because if you want to go out and get a federal grant over here to clean up that industrial site over there, You need to bring in, you know, a bunch of certified professionals and a bunch of lawyers, and then you got to find a 25% match from somewhere, and the city doesn't have, you know, $500,000 lying around to put into this one grant project. And then it ends up being an application that's this thick, and then it ends up being testing, and then there's this much paperwork, all because somebody put a backhoe in the ground and took the dirt out, and now it's clean. You know, and stuff like this goes on, and so I'm expressing a kind of frustration that we've had to work in this community very, very hard to just get to a baseline, you know, where our properties are clean and ready for redevelopment, where our people are getting good education at YSU, and these kinds of basic elements it's just been pushing a boulder up the hill. But what's also happening simultaneous with that, I remember being in Europe in '72, and all the talk was about the war 30 years on, and you know, as a kid I thought, well, what's the matter with these people? You know, get over it. Well, here we are 30 years on. We didn't have a war, but our landscape was devastated. And when you get a war, you get the advantage of everybody coming together to clean up the mess, and whereas here we were blamed for the devastation. And so we had to get a whole generation through that. And then Trump comes along and says, I'm going to bring steel back again. Well, no, we don't want steel back again. Realistically, we want a nice, diverse economy that can withstand the ebbs and flows of the national trends and things like that. And we're getting there. We still have a great manufacturing base that's wonderful, but we need more natural resource production and leisure and hospitality and those other sectors, education, healthcare, those other sectors. So we're slowly building that up. And again, it's another boulder up the hill. But that's what I see in the 20-odd years I've been at this. And we're getting much better at it. We're working together much more, and I see it happening bit by bit, which is great.
Thank you. Thank you for that detailed answer. And in a related, sort of following this train, if you will, when we're talking about structures and systems, the median household income in the city of Youngstown, and I am saying household income, is roughly $24,500. More than a third of the city residents live at or below the poverty level. 80% of the jobs in the city are held by people who don't actually live in the city. And many people who do live in the city typically work multiple jobs for low wages while spending even more money on basic needs, housing, childcare, transportation. Social and income inequality in America is on full display in communities like Youngstown. Dolores and Matt, I wonder if you could individually talk about some of the structural elements behind social and even economic inequity and how we got here. Dolores?
Oh boy, how did we get here? Well, let's see. We could start with education, our public schools. Many students of color do not get the education just to get to high school and to get to college. Everyone knows about the public school to prison pipeline. So we can start there. We can put money into training programs. I'm going to puncture people's balloons. Not every student needs to go to college. Okay? We can put money into community colleges, into manufacturing, apprenticeships, if you want to call them that. So we have that. Okay? Too many urban youth are just hanging out on street corners. They don't see a way out. The jobs that people used to get at steel plants, like you said, you know, those kinds of, they're gone. Auto plants, gone. Okay? I know when I was a kid, college students used to come home, work at GM Ford for a couple of months and have enough money to pay their tuition going back to college. So that's one thing. ownership, like you said, house ownership, everyone knows. There's a lot of money that you can count on if you own a home. Well, we've got redlining. We've got people who don't make enough money for a down payment. We have those kinds of issues. Transportation. When I first came here, it's a good story. When I first came here, I didn't have a car. And I rode the buses of Youngstown. And there was a woman that rode the bus with me, grandmother. She had to take 2 buses to get to a grocery store. She had her grandson with her, who was about 3 years old. She's dragging him, ice and snow, all kinds of weather, just to get to a decent store. There are no decent stores here, grocery stores. And they told me, well, this place is too high, that place is too high. So what do you feed your kids? There's a McDonald's on every corner. And there isn't McDonald's, there's Pizza Hut, which is on my corner. Okay. Bad nutrition. You're feeding your kids this, and then they go to school, they fall asleep. Okay. What's that out there? Anyway, they fall asleep. They have, again, bad nutrition. You don't have health insurance, so you can't take your child to the dentist. You can't get them checkups. And it's like a vicious cycle. I
So
think I
you're
forgot.
talking about, so you're talking about cycles in mobility, and Matthew, I think a big part of your piece, I told you I admire that piece, is about the lack of social mobility. And in fact, you make the case that among developed nations, we don't do well in terms of social mobility. So talk a little bit about your thesis and some of the factors that lead to this kind of stagnation.
Sure. Well, I feel comfortable at a theoretical level, so let's get into a helicopter and go really high in the sky. I'm going to offer a really reductionist explanation of human history, and I will just tell you it's not completely accurate, but hopefully it's useful. I'm going to base it on economic inequality. Economic inequality, both income and wealth, is high now. It's higher than it has been in 50 years. It's been going steadily up. It's also at the same level that it was about a century ago. When we attribute that kind of change to globalization and technology, as Glenn just did, I think to some degree we're trying to naturalize it and excuse it as a function of the way in which nature operates and does things. But in fact, there's ample evidence that it actually comes out of something within human beings, something in our society, and in conscious decisions we make at a policy level, but also in the decisions we make going around our daily lives. What are some of these mechanisms whereby human beings start to separate themselves? Well, I began my work with a basic intuition that I'm part of the problem. I'm using the I here in a kind of royal sense because I'm also going to suggest that you're part of the problem too. My point is that when we typically have discussions about inequality, we frame it as the 1% or the 0.1%, and we're looking at it from the outside. It's basically all of us, the great middle class, and there's some wealthy elite out there. I don't think that's accurate. I think that everybody in society to some degree participates in reproducing some of these structures. And in my piece, I pick on this, the top 10% of the 9.9%, but in fact, I think it actually shows up everywhere in our society. What are some of the conscious decisions that we make as we reproduce this inequality? Well, there are certainly policy decisions that ramp up inequality. Over the past 50 years, as inequality has gone up, our taxation policy has gone in the opposite direction. It's been encouraging the growth of inequality. So that's a conscious choice to increase inequality at a policy level. Technology, we like the idea that technology somehow creates this instant wealth out of nothing. Well, technology creates wealth through intellectual copyright laws and patent laws and things like that. Those are all the result of conscious choices that we make about who gets the spoils from economic activity. So there are a number, it's too simple to just say it's part of a natural process. In fact, there are policy choices and we can think about those. But then there are a number of processes that take place in our daily lives where we end up reproducing some of these things. What happens to an education system in the context of rising inequality? Well, we can see what's happened. Education was the great engine of opportunity in the United States. That is what created the middle class. Our public school system, which arose in the 19th century, was an important foundation of that. And then the rapid rise of the university system, which was aided tremendously by the GI Bill, took that further and expanded opportunity to create a middle class. In the context of rising inequality, what's happened? We've turned it into a mechanism for reproducing privilege. So we've now created a system in which wealthy people have a much better chance of going to or sending their children to universities that will give them a leg up in the economy. And we are now creating a class of people who go into massive debt in the slim hope that they will be able to join the upper classes, when in fact the odds are that that's going to actually send them farther down into a separate class order. So what I'm trying to suggest is that the class system in the United States is emerging. We're in denial about this. We like to pretend that we're all middle class, but that's not, we're moving away. This has ample historical precedent. It has ample historical precedent in the United States. In my piece, I sort of jokingly used my family's history with the Roaring '20s and so on to suggest that some of those things are coming back. There are earlier periods of time that we can also refer to. But the bottom line is that once you get this kind of class structure, this division and this self-perpetuating inequality, you are going to see some of the negative developments that we see in our time. One of the constant themes that I've been confronting coming here is that there's a lot of anger, there's a lack of trust, there's polarization. And I think our discussions are shallow if we think that that's just the result of bad attitudes and people for some reason being nasty or being getting the wrong messages. Those are there because in fact when you have inequality, you create this lack of trust, you separate the classes, and you also create people who have an incentive to manipulate everybody else, because you create a system in which the rewards people can't hold on to their estate without to some degree manipulating other people. So populism isn't just some kind of random thing that sort of appeared out of nowhere here, nor is it something that we can just bat away with good manners. It's something that in fact characterizes societies as they start to break down in this way. I think you pushed the lecture button on me, so I better stop.
I actually think the discussion is really interesting and really nuanced. You mentioned taxation as a contributor to wealth inequality, and I think I'll return to Glenn on this because, again, going with your Wall Street Journal piece, you applauded the recent tax cuts. And I guess my question would be for Glenn and Sarah. Why were the tax cuts a good idea for Glenn? And then Sarah, have you seen any benefit in our local economy from the tax cuts?
Well, on tax policy, I actually wish we hadn't had a net tax cut. I would have rather seen a real tax reform. What I was referring to in the piece is the corporate tax cut, which was a rate cut.
That's right.
Because that does increase business investment in wages. And I think most business people are quite happy with that, and that's a good thing. I would have rather seen a tax bill that was actually paid for, and I wanted the Congress to do that. So it's not the cut part. Writ large for the U.S., because of, if you look at our tax and transfer system together, we're actually more progressive than many of our European counterparts. So I don't think it's a lack of progressivity. So I'm not as worried about tax policy.
Sarah, have you seen any benefit, any uptick in development or even in sort of the attitude around development since the corporate tax in our area?
It may be a little early for that, but one of the things that came out of the Jobs and Tax Cuts Bill of 2017 was a pretty promising program called the Opportunity Zone program, where we were all invited to map out the more distressed census tracts for us in the two counties, Mahoning and Trumbull County to the north. And what that would do was provide for investors when instead of taking the capital gains tax and paying the tax, they can take that chunk of funds and put it into an opportunity zone investment. And then if you hold it there for 10 years, you're free of the capital gains tax. Okay, so the rich folks benefit off of that nicely, but so do we. And I think it'll take a little while for something like that to work, but we have had these historic tax credits for a few years, a similar mechanism, and you all stayed in that lovely DoubleTree Hotel downtown, historic tax credits. And again, there's much paperwork, you know, you can build another building with it, but it was a really great tool for us, and we can use more of those. It's not perfect, but it's good, and we can work with it.
Great, thank you. Not too long ago, I think about a month ago, the Brookings Institute was here along with Opportunity America, and they were doing a bipartisan sort of deep dive. And they had some policy recommendations, and the title of this session is called Opportunities for the Working Class. Much of that discussion revolved around retooling career education and training. Glenn, I believe you mentioned apprenticeships as well. I think Dolores, you did as well. So some of those suggestions were reforming overburdensome licensing requirements, and the example Dolores and I have talked about this because there's quite a racial history behind that. But for example, the 14-month requirement to get a barber's license, lowering the cap on education tax credits, savings accounts, and eliminating graduate student loan forgiveness on the logic that graduate education is preparation for elite professionalization. So Matthew and Dolores, I wonder if you would comment on any of those proposals.
Dolores,
Well, first of all, because I have grad students, I want to forgive all graduate student loans. That's number one.
I think my students are so.
I'm over that.
Yeah.
The licensing thing, actually, that's kind of good and bad because no one wants to go to a hairdresser and she uses the wrong chemicals because she hasn't been trained. So I think we can look at some of the licensing regulations and try to work with them. I'm not going to go into the whole history of the barbers and all of that. If you hire a contractor, you want to make sure he's got a license. There's certain things that they have to do. But yes, sometimes, you know, we've got tons of regulations that tie people's hands. Some people can't afford the license. And that's how we get, you know, people on Judge Judy. But
she's very well.
that will make it $20 million a year. But anyway, I think to help with income inequality and some of the other inequalities we do have, we could put more money into training. I don't know about the earned income thingy, but retraining people. Most of our, a lot of our professions have disappeared. Okay? And the first thing I always think about is mining. I can't believe, all of these people want their coal mining jobs back. I can't believe they want their children to go into the coal mines. Okay? I don't think coal is coming back. But we need to train folks for different industry. I know in some coal mining areas, the coal mining is the only occupation there because mine owners have kept out other, sources of occupation. So we need to look at that. We need to go into those areas and talk about retraining the young people.
Thank you. Matthew, and again, I'll go
Let
through.
me just follow up on what you said, because I heard a word that sparks my interest. That's the licensing requirements. That's part of a larger discussion. And I'm concerned, I haven't seen the Brookings proposal, but I'm concerned that they went for the lowest of the low-hanging fruit in this broader discussion. So the broader discussion is that parts of our economy have been captured, that we have cartel-like behavior among doctors, for example, who can control their competition, and they limit the competition, and therefore their salaries are sky high. But there are other forms of capture too. There's real estate capture in a way. People in a neighborhood essentially say, no building here, it's ours. And licensing requirements is one part of that, and then people often bring up the hair salon and so on as an example of this kind of capture. But what concerns me, and I don't want to pick on Brookings without knowing what the proposal is, what concerns me is that, yeah, they went after the hair salon because that was the easy one. Why didn't they go after the doctors? Or why didn't they go after the real estate capture or the other forms of capture of the economy? Because that is a serious problem in our economy, that big parts of it are hived off. Broadly speaking, what are the parts of the economy that are hived off, that are captured? They're not the hair salon people, frankly. It's the people who have business degrees, college degrees, and so on. Those parts of the economy are the ones that are much more likely to be captured, where you're likely to find excess rents. What are the parts that are not going to be captured? The people who are going to go to these worker training programs and get the earned income tax credit, right? Now, what's the fundamental source of that problem? Is it that they're not getting those credits or not getting the training? No, I would argue that the fundamental source is they don't have the power in the workplace. They don't have the power to negotiate and drive a good bargain for their work. And that's why we have to then turn around and figure out ways to subsidize their wages, or figure out versions of a negative income tax, which is all that the earned income tax credit is at some level, which are fine. I mean, I think those policies are great. I would support an increase in the earned income tax credit, or maybe even some form of wage subsidy if you can figure out how to do it. But let's look at the great opportunity of this kind of crisis and moment of division is we can think about fundamentals. And the fundamentals here go a lot deeper. They go to this economy that is to some degree captured by rent seekers. They go to an economy where people who are adding a tremendous amount of value, the people who are actually working, are disempowered. They're disempowered because they're not represented, because labor law has been eviscerated over the last 50 years, and also because they've been asked to take all the risks in our society. We've had this amazing, amazing transfer of risk where, if bad things happen, they basically fall on the population. Whereas as far as the larger institutions go, if bad things happen, well, then the taxpayer pays. I mean, we got that story in the financial crisis. So I guess I'm going on a rant now, but let me just say that I think we need to take advantage of this moment to think about fundamentals, and I'm concerned that these Brookings people, let's bring them back and tell them to offer something real instead of hair salons.
I think it's an interesting talk. I think it's an interesting series of proposals, and I think when you think about graduate education and the idea of elite professionalization, it becomes very interesting from a class perspective. But maybe that's something we can talk about in the Q&A, which is where I would. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to add, I have one more to piggyback on what you were saying about these associations. The American Banker Association. Everyone, how many of you go to the ATM or for an ATM, you got to pay a fee. You always have to pay a fee to use your money, and it goes up and up and up. Okay? Bounce a check, good Lord, another fee. If you don't have the money for the overdraft thing. And that's another thing that the Brookings Institute didn't look at.
It was Brookings and Opportunity America.
Okay.
There is bipartisan study, right? But I would, yeah.
Because I think something that Matthew said was extremely important. I want to underscore. And I'll join a meeting up on Brookings. It's fine. Okay, well, I'll vote. But the way we responded to the financial crisis really is something we're going to read the world in for a very long time. There are very legitimate reasons for the bank bailouts, as hand-handed as they were and as poorly sold as they were. But at the same time, millions of Americans were not able to refinance mortgages when the government had already nationalized the risk of all mortgages. We'd already taken Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's on the book. That would have been very easy to do. The government decided not to do that. So you could ask, millions of Americans could say, why were no bank CEOs fired and why were banks bailed out when I'm current on my mortgage and I can't refinance? We're going to reap the world into that for a very long time.
Thank you. We do have time for Q&A. Like I said, I know we have a real big group of smart economic development people and social justice folks in the audience, so I'd like to take questions.
So I'd love your opinions on how we're retraining and we're saying we're going to take archaic industries and we're going to retrain them. But what I've seen, just in my own personal experience, is that then we try to retrain them in an archaic way, almost in a one-to-one way, right? We're not taking things, something that's really scalable, so sometimes it makes me question, is it just, smoke a little bit, because there's thousands of different sectors, small industries. You can't do a one-to-one thing and really make a difference, right? So I would love to hear your opinions on how can we do this in a scalable way, technology, but why is it that the strategies are typically so one-to-one? We're going to have a little group of 10 when there's 50,000 of these people that need to be trained.
So the question is, how do we scale retraining in a systemic and efficient way?
I would say, too, you hit on probably the big one, which is to use online, but to use it in partnership. So specifically, I think community colleges have a huge role to play with local employers. Local employers know the skills they need. Community colleges are very good at developing those skills. There's a lot of money the Department of Labor spends now on some of the kinds of programs you discussed. So it's not that we even need to spend more, but we need to spend it better. And devolving it more toward community colleges, to my mind, even in a block grant, to community colleges to work with local firms would make a lot of sense.
I can just add that I would strongly support additional support for community colleges because that does seem to be an underdeveloped area in our economy. And then I'll just make a general sweeping point, which won't address your specific concern. Other countries do invest a lot more than we do. And so one of the broad themes I'd like you to consider is that we should ditch some of our American exceptionalism and take seriously what other countries can show on this, because the amount that they invest, countries like Germany or the Scandinavian countries, on retraining workers is dramatically higher, and the results are significantly better.
I'm going to follow up on your question. Is part of that difficulty, and maybe Dolores, this is a question for you as well, that so much of higher education, particularly public higher education, is now doing the training work that used to be done by employers. Is that part of the equation at all?
I think that is part of the equation, and now that you brought up universities, look, I think the solution to our higher education issues passes mainly through our public state universities. They educate by far the most people, and they play the most important part in the economy, so we need to do something there. And I'm sorry to sound like a kind of spender or something, but we've been systematically cutting education funding at precisely the time when it is perhaps most important to have it. That doesn't mean we can't innovate, and there are universities that are doing interesting things, and I recommend that you look at places like Arizona State University that's looking at new ways to go farther with the resources it has and not produce massively debt-burdened kids. I think the University of Maryland is also doing interesting things. There's a lot that we can do, and I don't feel qualified to go any farther with it. But the main thing is that this is an area, again, where we've underinvested. And here, another general theme I'd like to bring out, let's not rule out things that seem crazy. People might say, oh, funding education is ridiculously expensive. Well, guess what? 50 years ago, we pretty much did that. So it's not impossible. And we should be considering things like that.
So we won't rule out crazy.
We won't rule out crazy.
Yes, ma'am, in the back.
In addition to community colleges, state departments of education have adult education programs. We have them in every county in Ohio. I work with them, okay? And they, first of all, most times there's no entrance exam. They can't get financial aid for it. And they do the training, they can turn around training so fast in terms of getting of providing the skills to employers that they need. Community colleges, you still have to work on getting that program set up. Adult education centers do that quite well, and they're funded by state taxes. So it exists, we just got to get people to go and recognize where they are and use them. Because everybody keeps saying, we need training, we need training. It's out there. People just need to use it. So, you know, it's unfortunate. But now here in our area, we're lucky that because Eastern Gateway, the community college in our area, is really located in Jefferson County, they can't afford to set up the kind of labs that you need for career and technical education. So they use the career centers. So we have the training. Every time I hear people talk about, well, we need more training. We have it. Okay? We just need to make certain that people know about it and they use it. Okay? I mean, we have a program right now. I just want to say this. We have a power plant program at Youngstown State. Yeah, Youngstown State has 2-year degrees. I know because I worked with them and I still work with them. If somebody will spend 2 years, and I'm talking about people who were people that were laid off from GM or displaced from some other kind of company, they can go for 2 years. When they leave, their starting salary is between $50,000 and $80,000 to work in a power plant. And we're not talking about dirty power plant. We're talking about something that looks like Lordstown. If you haven't had a chance to look at Lordstown, you need to look at it. It's equipped with Siemens products, so that means that those are German products that are very good. So, okay. So I'm just saying, it's usually a lack of knowledge and people don't realize what's available. So when people keep saying we need training, they need to first see what exists out there.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you. Sir, with that.
I've heard that a couple of times about these community colleges. Educated working class guy here. I'm 61 years old. Back in the 50s and 60s, my father was a power lineman for Ohio Edison Company, which was the electric utility at the time. They were a state-regulated monopoly at that time. So the expectation was they trained their help when they needed a lineman, rather than the taxpayers trained them. But be that as it may, if someone goes to this power plant school in Youngstown and takes out loans of $20,000, $40,000, $50,000 to get through this 2-year thing, $25,000, if they're not eligible for a retraining grant, are they guaranteed a job when you get out of here, or do they compete in the marketplace with everybody else?
Not locally, they're
Yeah.
not.
Okay.
Yes.
Locally, they're not.
Other questions?
Let me just add a little 2 cents on that. I'm concerned from the workforce development side. It's a loathsome term anyway, workforce development. But there's a difference between education and training, and we all need to be educated first to be good people, to find a happy life, to solve problems in a creative way, to do critical thinking, to vote well. All those things come with education. But that also gives you the intellectual framework to get trained later on. And what I see some CEOs doing that in their workforce training and ongoing training, and that is good management. And other CEOs who are just besieged with other things all the time and unable to keep the workforce trained in an ongoing way. But I do think that we sacrifice a lot when we don't start with education, and I get annoyed when people say, what are you going to do with that English degree? Right?
Well,
Look at you.
Certification of the choir.
Yeah, the better economic development banker people really are the liberal arts people who know a little bit about a lot of things. There's a place for all of that, but education shapes the mind, and I think it's worth everything. Yeah.
I think that's a great point, and my people thank you. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I have a question about the gig economy. So there's really a trend towards more and more workers being, in effect, kind of independent contractors. So it's a question really for all of you, but how do you feel about this trend? Do you think it's appropriate? If not, or even if so, what policy changes would you recommend in light of that?
Sure, I'll take that. There's part of me that finds it really appealing because my whole life has been one big gig. Not sure when I'm moving tomorrow, but look, technology creates that as an opportunity, and so there is something there that we shouldn't neglect. And do we really want to go back to a world where everything is regimented and everyone has the same kind of thing and fits into the same box? So, with that kind of positivity out of the way, let me just say that this is a terrific example of how we, or at least the wealthy, have learned how to exploit people, because we are shifting through the gig economy all the risk-taking, all the insurance aspects of our society on those individuals, and then basically forcing them to deal with the consequences on their own. So to get back to positivity, what can we do to make it work? Well, if people didn't have to worry about health care, the gig things would look a lot better, right? And in fact, there's ample evidence that in countries where you do have universal health care, you have more people being sole proprietors and going off on their own and doing interesting things. So, and that would make the gig thing good. The same thing is true for providing the education and training. If we can provide that, then the gig thing doesn't look so bad. And then finally, I think you do have to allow for some kind of a certain set of cultural norms to come in. One thing that has been very difficult for our society to absorb is the fact that because we don't have regular schedules anymore, we don't know how to raise families, we don't know how to deal with one another socially necessarily. And while I'm not saying we should all go into some particular form, we need to figure out a way that would allow a gig economy to work with child rearing and family and things like that. And that's a very general concept. I just think that's something we have to look at. Perhaps somebody else has a view on the gig.
Well, I agree with you about the independent contractor. That title sounds so nice and glamorous. But then you look at, like you said, who's going to pay for my insurance? Because Uber isn't paying for my health insurance. Yeah, I've got freedom to make my own hours, but I need health care. I need extra money. I'm doing this because I need extra money. But the things that we expect from the traditional employer, and we trade for that nice title, independent contractor. Where are the safety regulations? That's one of the things we, trade off for, that kind of thing. So, anyone else?
Would anyone else like to comment on the gig?
I look back 15, 20 years, I took a look at my friends and family, and I realized even the ones that are full-time employed have another gig. And so this has been going on for a long time in a quiet way, because that full-time employment doesn't really make ends meet quite the way you thought it would, and so on. And so I tell every young person, make sure you have 2 gigs that you can, because you might lose one, get the other, and you need to have at least a couple of skill sets just in case, and so on. That's a tough pull, but I think it's part of the reality of being in this economy now.
I wonder if I could follow up on the gig question, because I think it's really fascinating. And Matthew, I think you were getting at that. Workplaces did provide a communal function as well, right? It's where we often encounter people who are different from us, people who think differently, right? More united in a common goal. Is there a fear or a danger that in a gig economy we become, we retreat further to our muscles?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and now you brought it onto the terrain of philosophy, which is where we hopefully will all end up. The gig economy has evolved as a result of a kind of breakdown of the social compact, and that social compact was previously carried out in part through businesses that accepted that they had a certain set of responsibilities to their communities, but also responsibilities to their employees. And then the employees returned that by creating community, by, as you say, getting to know people at work, and so that provided a certain kind of community structure. The gig thing pulverizes that, and so we absolutely need to address that. But I think that actually also, I think there is a future where you can come up with a gig economy where there is a kind of community, where people do find ways to work together. And you can see it to some degree in niche areas where, if you're involved in particular tech sectors, and then at the high end of the gig economy, you have biotech entrepreneurs in my neighborhood, and they're all hanging out and doing gigs and so on, and actually have a great community. And I think you can find a way for it to work, but you have to figure out how you can. I think what we need to drive this towards is a rethinking of some of our fundamental values. We need to stop understanding self-realization purely in terms of paychecks and jobs, and think more about what it is that we're really valuing. And if we can do that, I think we can come up with a kind of gig thing that works, because in a way that will be subordinating the economic to some degree to things that we might value more. And collectively as a society, I think a lot of these issues that we're talking about now, the anger, the polarization, the inequality, some of that does go back to certain philosophical commitments that we've made, and we're not willing to question about what's really important in life.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
This question's for Sarah. So you spoke earlier about the level of effort that you put into get the area to a baseline level to be attractive for economic revitalization investment. At the same time, though, as you're aware, right, it's a competitive landscape for an increasingly scarce amount of corporate investment in communities. Can you give us a sense of the level of collaboration, if at all, that you have at a regional, state, or multi-state regional level, so that this investment is more collaborative as opposed to competitive in bringing about revitalization in communities?
God, I couldn't have scripted you to ask that question.
Anytime.
Because one of the challenges in this valley has been we can't see beyond the valley, and then we're fighting inside the valley amongst each other, and there really has been a whole lot of turf battles that have gone on. But I have seen bit by bit, you don't see it day by day, but bit by bit you see people finally coming to the table. One example is we got the 9 mayors up along the Mahoning River meeting every quarter, and finally they speak as one voice in Columbus and Washington, D.C. They used to be fighting for a fly and they hated each other. Now they drink beer together and everything's happy, And that's an example of a really good thing, because that has helped us win more opportunity. But we have also, folks like Phil have brought in so many really great people and resources to help broaden our conversation. We don't have the answers by ourselves, and we realize that. And you can't rebuild without heavy collaboration. And I often think of it maybe simplistic, but I think this whole free market model is so social Darwinian, it's ridiculous. And I'd like to see us get off of that, because we need to live well. And that's what economic development is. Economic is the old Greek for housekeeping, no big deal. We just got to keep it clean and enough food in the larder. And so that takes working together. And so I'm thrilled by that, and I hope you guys in your careers always look for a way to collaborate and bring out the best in your colleagues, because that's how we win it.
Thank you.
But I'm a socialist.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to hear Janine Hubbard's response to that, so that we can get
She had me up to the market economy. It's clear that economic development is a huge role for government. We have a sterile debate in the country, in my opinion, between should government be big or small. More and less kind of debates are never as interesting as what is it should you be doing. I think there's a case to be made for a big muscular government. But a muscular government that's doing what you suggest. They're trying to break down barriers to opportunity in economic development. But after that, I'm less excited about government. But in terms of government as a battering ram to help that, awful.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Can you speak to the digital divide and its effect on the economic divide and the social inequity?
So who would like to speak about the digital divide?
What does that mean? People have access and other people have no access.
Barriers to technology, access to technology, literacy with technologies. It's often stratified by age, socioeconomics access?
Yeah, I would say it could mean several things. One is pure access, like do you have a computer? There are ways to do it. There are libraries and universities and community centers. To me, what I worry more about is everyone's digital literacy. So if we talk about what we've been doing tonight, training and moving to jobs of the future, if we have some people who are just not comfortable with technology or not comfortable with digital in their life, it's going to be hard for them to make those moves. And so I think the more we can do to get everybody comfortable, get everybody there, age is going to be an issue, but also sometimes just orientation, whether you're interested or not. I think the divide will get more serious. Jobs of 20 years from now will be so heavily dependent on this that people who either are unwilling or unable to make the investment will pay the price.
Thank you. Sean?
Maybe I'll just come up here a little bit more.
I don't know, I came in a little late, so I don't know if you talked about any of this at all, but, and this hasn't gotten maybe as much attention as it deserved, but over the past few years, there's been a lot of research on, like, the geographic bifurcation of the country. So, starting, I think, like, right around maybe 1992, when George Herbert Walker Bush was president and they had a recession. Then there was a recession in 2001, then 2007, 2008. After every recession, the recovery concentrates itself in smaller and smaller parts of the country, and especially with new business creation. And it's actually amazingly small. So I remember kind of traveling around a little bit right after the Great Recession, and there were places that were just wiped out, and there were places like the Bay Area where it was just, there was no recession. They just kept on coming. And in Ohio here, we haven't recovered from the recession of 2001, which was 17 years ago. Forget about the recession of 2008. And I know also this relates back to the election where they broke down the numbers and Hillary Clinton won basically the most productive parts of the country, typically on the coasts, and typically the most left behind parts of the country were carried by Trump. So obviously this has some political implication too, especially with populism. I wonder, and anybody who wants to answer would riff on that idea.
Sure, I'm happy to work a little bit on it and pass it over. So there are two kinds of levels of vision that we're talking about, and I think that you brought up. One is inter-regional, so large parts of the country. And there certainly is some, there's certainly a lot of that kind of disparity going on, but the evidence suggests that the more interesting changes have happened at this second level, which is intra-metropolitan area, and basically the segregation within zones, within commuter zones. And there all the evidence shows that we've witnessed a significant, steady and significant increase in economic segregation. Believe it or not, there's actually some evidence of a slight decrease in racial segregation, but that's certainly not, you won't notice that if you go to certain parts of the country. I was in Dallas last week, and I can promise you that's incredibly racially segregated. But setting that aside, the economic segregation has increased dramatically, and that has, and that's within cities. And we all know this. I mean, if you spend any time in any of the major metropolitan areas, you know which neighborhoods are the richest and which ones are not. And I can certainly relate to it personally. I grew up in a number of middle-class neighborhoods, moving around the country as a military grad. And it never occurred to me, I didn't think that all the people with one income level would be in one particular area and all the ones with another would be in another area. That's pretty much where we are now, and that's the world in which I'm living now, and the world in which I'm raising my kids. That's a very dramatic difference, and of course, that then plays a crucial role in passing along privileges and advantages. So I think that's it's an absolutely central development in our time. Just to take out my last 2 seconds here, it's really important to understand that some of that becomes self-perpetuating and it entrenches itself. Because, of course, the wealthy neighborhoods then, they control their local zoning and they essentially pull up the drawbridge behind them. And unfortunately, this process, it's just been going in one direction. This would be an opportunity for a powerful government to intervene at actually no cost or negative cost to essentially rip zoning control away from localities in some form or other. It could probably be done through just So it's a really significant part of the story. I'm sure there are other parts.
Those forces I mentioned, the technological change, globalization, where you'd expect them to have their biggest effects, the highest productivity sectors, tech-type sectors that are typically on the coast, they're going to boom. That's what you saw. The sectors most negatively exposed would be manufacturing, which tended to be concentrated in the heartland. So that's what happened. But then the question is what you do about it. And it strikes me there are three things. We know that places with diverse economies fare better than places without. Industry mixes don't come from God. New York City, for example, is a city that's reinvented itself many, many, many times with great effort and dislocation along the way. The second is something I once didn't believe in but now do, which is more place-based aid. There's a variety of impediments to geographic mobility, meaning the federal government has a responsibility to smooth that out while the communities work on industrial mix. And then the third piece is the training that we've been talking about for the industries of tomorrow. So that it hit the heartland isn't a surprise. What's surprising to me is that government didn't do enough to smooth that out.
And I was just going to add that we've seen in cities like Youngstown and cities Detroit and other so-called Rust Belt cities how the federal government came through with freeways and decimated poor neighborhoods, black neighborhoods, and destroyed businesses in black neighborhoods that way. And now we're starting to see, well, back then you had folks going to the suburbs. This is a new suburb, shopping malls, and what have you. And I know in Detroit right now, we're starting to see the reverse. Downtown Detroit is gone through a gentrification project on steroids. And now we're starting to see the people who escaped to the suburbs come back downtown. People are being displaced. There are no, low-income housing. That's gone by the wayside. And that's something that government, federal government, could look into because they're being displaced.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to address the anger subject, which is heavy around here. I think it comes down to something you mentioned. The whole time that the economy's gone down, they blame the workers. And that's where the anger comes from. They've internalized it, and a perfect example is if you were in Apple in 2008, when the Great Recession started, it was because of poor folks in the inner city who didn't pay their mortgage. It wasn't blamed originally on credit default swaps and all of that stuff that, that's where it was blamed. And people internalize that, and that's what you're seeing. And I think people here feel almost a guilt because they've been told the labor unions did this, you weren't educated enough, you were none of that, where really they had no control of that. The companies obviously did because they could move overseas, still produce, or they could move where there were, and so people internalize that. And that's where I think the anger comes from, is that blaming, where the worker was I can't say fully respected, but appreciated before. And then once it started in the 70s, they were blamed rather than appreciated.
Yeah, I think that's a really profound and an important comment. And rather than just echo it back to you, what I will point out is that the United States does have a history of stoking a certain kind of anger, and I call it black anger. Because we've done that, we basically pulled the same trick collectively, blaming a group of people, and then when they respond with a certain amount of anger, doubling the blame, essentially. So I think it's a very important point.
I think we take one more quick question. Yes, Lily. Hey, Colleen.
So there's some discussion about the dignity of work, and there's this discussion of digital literacy, and I'm kind of lost somewhere between there, thinking about this reaching back into the replication of economic conditions in the early 20th century. And I can't help but think of the arts and crafts movement and various other pushbacks against industrialization. What are perhaps analogous pushbacks against this digital space that we find ourselves caught in, and the lack of literacy, with the complexity of the gig economy layered on top as a condiment, perhaps.
That's a really great last one.
That's my question.
Let me just, in broad generalities, American history is incredibly rich and actually offers a tremendous number of examples of people resisting this kind of encroachment on power. And I would, consider what the by the way, we should stop calling this thing populism now, because the real populists were not at all like it, and they're way much more interesting. And if you look to them, I'm talking to the people in the late 19th century who wanted to say no to the rising plutocracy of the Gilded Age, and they were shut down. They were defeated. William McKinley was elected, and after getting the biggest infusion of cash up until the present day, and electoral campaign. But there are many chapters like that. And the arts and crafts movement, I think, is another thing that you could turn to. I mean, I think there are resources from the transcendentalist movement in the early 19th century. So I would just encourage you to take an optimistic view of American history and look for those positive and encouraging examples.
Interesting. McKinley's a local favorite center. So I've been a church actually over in Haiti. Thank you all for participating. It's great to go. This is not a paid gig. Do whatever you like.
Okay, I'll just stand here. So I'm Katie. I'm from Columbia Business School, and on behalf of all of Columbia Business School, I just want to thank the YSU Center for Working Studies. Phil and Tim always take a risk on us coming out here and putting together a panel. And for all of you coming out tonight, as students, well, we just had to come here because we're already here. But for the rest of you who are from the area, thank you for coming out and making this collaborative discussion where we really are trying to share understandings from the coast and from the not coast. So we kind of have a little gift for all of the panelists, just to say thank you. So first and foremost, this is more of a bridging kind of event. So Dean Hubbard, this is for you and your wife. Comes with a shirt.
We want selfies.
Yeah. And then, so that's like a little Youngstown gift, and then we have for our panelists, just some Columbia Business School gifts. And last but not least, Tim and Phil, you guys are like now part of the Columbia family. So, we just want to thank you guys for continuing to bridge this divide as much as possible, and just a round of applause for them.
Yeah, you can't really, I didn't think, end this night any better than that. So we'll just close by saying thank you very much for making time tonight on Saturday evening to come out. I also want to make mention that there is plenty of pizza left. So either eat it now or take it with you, because we're not taking it with us. So mix and mingle, have a good time. Thank you everybody for coming out. Thank you, panelists.